The wind rolled across the plains like a long sigh from a land that had grown tired. Dust drifted in lazy circles, catching the last of the sunlight as it sank behind the hills. On the edge of a quiet homestead, a woman sat alone on a creaking porch, her rocking chair swaying gently as if trying to lull the silence into comfort. Mary Ellen Parker had not expected visitors. Not that evening, not that month, maybe not ever again. She wore her late husband's flannel over her nightdress and held a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee in her hands. The porch light flickered. Slightly, fed by a weak flame and stubborn habit, she stared into the darkening horizon, watching it swallow the dirt road whole. Her land was barren, save for the twisted oak tree near the fence and a stubborn mule that brayed at shadows. Everything she once cared about was gone or buried, and the rest had simply learned to keep quiet. Then came the footsteps. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the rhythm was wrong, slow, uneven. One step dragged, another stumbled. Her body tensed before her mind caught up. She stood slowly, setting the mug on the rail. Reaching for the shotgun leaning against the doorframe, she cocked it with a sound loud enough to warn any fool nearby. But the figure that appeared out of the dusk didn't flinch. He was tall but hunched, either from injury or the weight of things unseen. His coat was torn at the shoulder, the fabric soaked dark at the side. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed most of his face, but she could see a beard, short and unkempt, and the cracked lips of a man who hadn't spoken much lately. He stopped at the edge of the steps. Mary raised the shotgun higher. "I don't have anything worth stealing," she said, voice firm. "Just old grief and bitter bread." The man didn't answer, but he didn't look dangerous. Not in the way men could be. He looked finished, like someone who'd ridden too far for two. "Long without knowing why." "I ain't here to steal," he said, voice like gravel under tired boots. Her grip eased just a little. "Then why are you here?" He looked past her, past the porch, past the lamp and the cracked windows and the lonely chair. "I got nowhere else to go." Mary held his gaze for a long second, then lowered the gun. "You're bleeding." He glanced down as if he hadn't noticed, and nodded once. "You can sit on the porch only, and if you try anything, I won't." He limped up the steps and sat slowly at the far end of the porch, back resting against the post. The fur sigh that left his body was deeper than the plains around them. Mary disappeared inside. When she returned, she had a faded rag and a bowl of leftover stew, mostly broth and potatoes. She handed him the rag first, then placed the bowl on the floor beside him. He didn't move right away, just stared at it like it was more than food, like it was something he didn't believe he still deserved. She sat back down in her rocker, facing forward, watching nothing. He finally lifted the bowl. "Thank you," he said. "Don't make it more than it is," she replied. "You look half dead. I just don't want a corpse on my porch." He gave a dry, soundless chuckle, a ghost of something that once resembled a man. The wind picked up again, colder now. Mary wrapped her quilt tighter but didn't go inside. He didn't either. They sat in silence, two strangers with too many stories between them to speak. She didn't ask his name, and he didn't offer it. But something had begun. Quiet, fragile, like the first spark on a long, forgotten fire. By the time the first light broke over the horizon, Mary had already lit the stove and boiled water for coffee. The mule brayed once at nothing, as it did most mornings, and silence reclaimed the land. She glanced toward the porch window, half expecting to see the stranger gone, vanished into the same wind that had carried him there. But he was still there, sitting in the exact same spot, head bowed, hat low, arms resting on his knees, as if sleep had come and gone without bothering to stay. The bowl she'd given him was empty and neatly set beside the post. Mary stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. "You planning to die here, or just hoping I ask you to stay?" He looked up slowly, and in the pale dawn, she saw the full toll of his weariness. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with salt and pain, like they'd spent the night sifting through every mistake he'd ever made. The right side of his shirt was stained a deep brown now, and the makeshift bandage she'd offered lay forgotten near the steps. "I just needed to rest," he said, voice softer now. "Didn't think I'd wake up." Mary didn't answer. She disappeared inside again, returned with hot water and the same rag, freshly cleaned. She knelt without asking and reached for his arm. He didn't flinch. The bullet wound wasn't deep, but it was dirty, old, probably earned days ago and left to rot. She cleaned it in silence, working with steady hands like she'd done once before, on her husband years ago when the war returned him half-broken and less than whole. The man watched her, but said nothing. When she finished, she tied the rag snug. "I ain't patching you again," she said. "If it festers, that's on you." He nodded once. "I've had worse." She stood, brushing her hands on her apron. "You still haven't said your name." He didn't look at her. "Ain't sure I remember it." Mary stared at him for a moment, then turned toward the door. "Then I'll call you what you look. Like, you got the eyes of a man sitting in ashes." "I've sat in worse," he murmured. She stopped at the threshold, something catching in her breath, but she didn't turn. "You want breakfast?" He blinked. "You got any?" "No, but if you can chop kindling, I can fry an egg." He rose slowly, wincing as he stood. "Ain't chopped wood in a long time." "You remember how?" He gave her the ghost of a smile. "We'll see." The axe was dull, and the wood was stubborn, but he moved like a man trying to remember what it felt like to do something useful. Mary watched from the window, arms crossed, lips tight. She didn't smile. Not yet. But she didn't stop watching. He cut poorly, uneven strokes and awkward pauses, but he didn't stop. By the time the pan was hot, he'd stacked a modest pile by the door. They ate in silence. 1 egg each, burnt toast, no butter, and still, he didn't leave. When she cleaned the plates, he offered to carry water from the well. When she swept the floor, he mended the broken hinge on the screen door without being asked. She didn't praise him. He didn't expect it. They didn't talk about why he was really there, not yet, but something settled that day. A rhythm, a pattern. By the time the sun slipped low behind the hills, he sat again on the porch, cleaner now, shirt mended, bandage white. "You gonna tell me why you're really out here?" she asked. He stared toward the horizon, looking for somewhere that don't remember me. Mary sat beside him, rocking, watching. "Well," she said, "this porch forgets quick." He glanced at her, but she didn't meet his eyes. The silence stretched, and neither of them tried to fill it. It was the kind of quiet that healed. By the third morning, the rhythm of things had changed, though no one said it out loud. Mary still rose before the sun. The mule still brayed. The wind still stirred the dust like it had nowhere better to be. But now there were 2 plates on the table, 2 chairs filled, 2 shadows moving across the floorboards, where once there had only been one. The man, still unnamed, hadn't asked to stay, and Mary hadn't invited him, but neither had pushed the other to speak of leaving. That was enough for now. He chopped wood again that morning, better than before. Then he patched a hole in the chicken coop and fixed the broken wheelbarrow. His limp had eased, though the stiffness in his shoulders said the pain was still there, buried somewhere deep. Mary brought him water in a tin cup and watched him work. He never spoke unless spoken to, but when he did, his words were careful, like they cost him something. "You work like a man trying to repay a debt," she said. He didn't stop hammering. "Maybe I am." That afternoon, the first visitor came. Clara Tinsley, the town's seamstress and self-appointed gatekeeper of decency, arrived in her buggy under a cloud of judgment and dust. Her eyes scanned the property with the precision of a hawk looking for snakes. When she saw the man by the barn, shirt rolled up, sweat on his brow, she clutched her parasol a little tighter. Mary met her at the fence, hands on her hips. "I brought you flour," Clara said, forcing a smile. "Heard you might be needing some." Mary didn't take the sack. "Since when do you care what I need?" Clara's eyes drifted past her. "Since you started taking in strangers with rifles and bloodstains. He's just resting, Clara leaned closer, voice dropping. Men like that don't rest. They watch, they wait, and when folks turn their backs, they burn what's left. Mary's jaw tightened. You done? No, but I'll be back. She tossed the flower onto the ground and turned her buggy around with unnecessary force. The mule kicked up a cloud of dry resentment as it trotted off. Later, the stranger returned to the porch. He carried the sack of flour in one hand, eyes thoughtful. She didn't look like she came to help. She didn't, Mary replied, sweeping the dust from the porch. She came to warn me, thought I should be afraid. Are you? She paused, then shook her head. Didn't know. He sat down on the steps. The sky was beginning to bruise with sunset, streaks of orange and violet bleeding through. Back east, he said suddenly. They used to call me a cleaner. I wasn't hired to fight. I was hired to end things. Mary stopped sweeping. I did things I ain't proud of, for men who smiled while I did it. She looked at him then, not with fear, but with something closer to pity or understanding. You ain't that man anymore. He stared into the sky. Don't feel like it matters. It does here. The town's whispers carried faster than the dust, and by nightfall, more folks had questions than Mary had patience. A boy tossed a rock near the porch and ran. The general store. Clark refused to fill her order the next morning, but she kept her back straight, her voice firm, and her eyes steady. You plan on staying long? She asked that evening, handing him a bowl of beans. He looked at her, the porch, the sky. No, she didn't ask when he'd go, but neither of them touched their food that night. He barely spoke the next day, not because he was hiding, at least not anymore, but because there was nothing left to say. Words were useful for men who still believed they could explain themselves. Samuel, though he hadn't said his name yet, had passed that point years ago. Instead, he worked. He sanded the warped planks on the porch, repaired a shutter that had flapped in the wind for 3 winters. When Mary asked if he needed nails, he only nodded. When she offered coffee, he nodded again. It became a language. Between them, nods, silence, the sound of boots on dry wood. Mary didn't mind. Her late husband had talked too much, especially after whiskey. Sometimes a quiet man was a mercy. In the afternoon, she found him out by the oak tree, staring at something half buried in the dry soil. She approached slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. That was where I planted flowers once, she said, standing beside him. They didn't take. He knelt without a word and began turning the soil with his hands. She opened her mouth to stop him, but didn't. There was something reverent in the way he worked, like he was asking the ground for permission. When he was done, he stood and looked at her. You got seeds? She blinked. I do, but they're old. So am I. She almost smiled. That evening after supper, he walked to the back of the house and stood for a long while at the wooden cross she'd carved into a fence post. Her husband's name was etched there, though the letters had faded in the sun. A boot print, decades old, still marked the dry ground in front of it. Samuel took off his hat and stood in silence. Mary watched from the window. She didn't interrupt. Some things were better left between men and ghosts. When he returned to the porch, she was sitting in her rocker again, eyes fixed on the horizon. You were in a war, she said, not asking. He nodded once. So was he. Silence. Then, softly, he come back? Parts of him did. Samuel let the silence stretch again. Then, after a long breath, he spoke. I lost men under my command. Good men. Not because we were outgunned, but because the men who gave orders never looked us in the eye. I stopped following orders after that. Mary turned her head toward him. His face was still in shadow, but she could see the scar near his jawline now, a deep cut that had healed ugly. You went rogue. I walked away, he said. Some called it desertion, others called it justice. She looked down at her hands. And what do you call it? I call it the last thing I ever did that felt right. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and smoke. Folks in this town don't forget things, Mary said, but they also don't remember what matters. He leaned back against the post. I don't need them to. She looked at him. Then, not like a stranger, not like a man to be feared, but like someone she almost recognized. "Maybe that's why you're here." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away. Later, as the stars crept out from behind the dark, they sat on that porch together, shoulder to shoulder, but never touching. Two people with voices worn thin by grief and time, and in the space between them, something unspoken had begun to take root. The wind shifted that night, came colder, sharper, like a warning whispered through the bones of the land. Mary added an extra log to the stove and pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. But even wrapped in warmth, she couldn't sleep. She rose before dawn, drawn by a feeling she couldn't name. Outside, the sky was a soft grey, neither night nor morning. And there he was, again, Samuel, sitting where he always did now, on the porch, elbows on his knees, head bowed. But something was different. She stepped outside quietly, her boots barely creaking on the floorboards. He didn't look up. "You ain't slept," she said. He didn't answer, not at first. Then, with a voice low and hoarse, he spoke. "Do you ever wake up feeling like you ain't supposed to be alive?" Mary froze in place. He lifted his head slowly, eyes hollow but searching. "I rode with men who could gut a man before breakfast and then pray before supper. I saw things, did things, and I told myself it was war, just war. But that was a lie." She sat beside him, the old wood groaning beneath her weight. He went on, slower now. "There was a boy, too young to shave. Blue eyes, kind laugh. They said he was a traitor, gave him 10 seconds to run before we were ordered to shoot." He swallowed hard. "I waited 11. Mary closed her eyes. "He died anyway. Another bullet. Not mine. But I didn't stop it either." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with the kind of grief that time doesn't heal, just teaches you how to carry quieter. Mary didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't know if it was hers to give, but she reached out and for the first time laid her hand over his. His fingers twitched, surprised, then stilled. "You don't have to bleed for that forever," she said softly. He shook his head. "I thought if I could disappear long enough, the weight would lift, but it don't. It just settles deeper." She nodded. "You don't get to disappear, not if you're still here." A pause, then, quieter than before. "My name's Samuel." She turned to him, truly seeing him now. "Mary," he smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I figured." For a while they sat like that, his hand beneath hers, her breath steady, the cold air brushing their faces like the edge of a truth neither of them knew how to hold. When the sun finally broke the horizon, it cast long shadows. Across the porch, two figures side by side, carved into the light like they'd always been there. Later Samuel rose and began to stack wood again, mended the barn door, fed the mule. He worked quietly, but now he whistled, low and tuneless, like a man trying to remember music he once knew. Mary baked cornbread. She hadn't done that in years. That evening he set the table without being asked. She served stew without apology. And for the first time since he arrived, they ate like people who might just sit together again tomorrow. As the sky faded to lavender, Samuel turned to her. "I'll go if you want." Mary met his eyes. Not yet. And that was enough. It was a dry morning when the dust trail appeared on the road east of Mary's land. Thin at first, barely more than a smudge in the sky. But Samuel noticed. He always noticed. He stood still in the field behind the barn, hoe in hand, watching the horizon like a man who's seen trouble take shape from less. The earth was soft beneath his boots, the beginnings of a garden struggling to live where flowers had once failed. But the dust line pulled his attention away from the dirt and back to a world he had tried to leave behind. Mary was on the porch, mending a coat sleeve, when she saw him staring. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. Later, he disappeared. For an hour. When he returned, he looked older. Not in face, but in posture. Something inside him had bent. At supper, he barely touched his food. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked. He nodded. "Not sure how many. But one of them's asking questions. About you? About what I left behind. He said no more. But Mary had seen the way he moved, the way he scanned the tree line when the wind shifted. It wasn't just nervousness. It was the instinct of a man who'd once been hunted and knew he would be again. The next day, the visitor arrived. Not a soldier, not a bounty hunter, a man in a fine brown coat and clean boots, riding a black horse too elegant for dusty roads. He didn't step off at the general store or the church. He came straight to Mary's gate. Samuel was already there, waiting. The rider tipped his hat. "You're hard to find." Samuel didn't answer. Mary came to the door, arms crossed. The man looked her way. "Ma'am, I'm not here to start trouble, just passing a message." "From who?" "From the governor." That name settled over the land like a thundercloud. "He says he remembers. What you did, Samuel. Says you vanished like a coward instead of standing trial." Samuel's hands didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. "He says he'll be riding through this town in a few days' time, with men. If you're here when he arrives, he'll assume you've chosen your path." The rider pulled a small envelope from his coat and set it on the fence post. "And if I'm not?" Samuel asked. The man shrugged. "Then you'll stay forgotten." He turned his horse and rode away, hooves echoing like war drums over the dry earth. Mary picked up the envelope, but didn't open it. Just stared at it, heart pounding. "Is it true?" she asked. Samuel didn't answer right away. "I was a ghost for their convenience. I followed orders until they gave me one I couldn't live with. So I buried the badge and left." Mary stepped closer. "And now?" He looked at her. "Now they want me to disappear on their terms." She shook her head. "You didn't ask for any of this." "No," he said, "but that never stopped men like them." That night, he stood watch outside the house, rifle over his shoulder, eyes on the hills. Mary watched him from inside, unable to sleep. Something had changed. The air was thick, expectant. She walked out and stood beside him. "You could run," she whispered. "I've done enough running." The wind carried the scent of rain that never came. "Then stay," she said. "But if you stay, we face it together." Samuel didn't look at her, but his voice was steady. "You sure about that?" "I'm not," she said, "but I'm tired of letting fear tell me who I am." And beside the porch where it all began, a decision took root. Firm, quiet, and unshakable. It happened just before dusk, the kind of light that paints the sky in bruises and fire when even the wind seems to hold its breath. Mary was gathering eggs from the coop, her apron heavy, when the ground began to tremble, not from thunder but from hooves. Not one horse, not two, a dozen. She looked up and saw it, a long, deliberate line of riders cresting the ridge beyond. The far fence. Dark shapes against the dying light. No banners, no dust cloud trailing behind. Just quiet, synchronized movement, like men trained to surround and subdue. 12. Her breath caught. On the porch, Samuel had already stepped forward. Rifle in hand, eyes fixed, jaw tight. The silhouette of a man ready to carry the weight of his past, no matter how heavy. Mary dropped the basket, eggs shattered at her feet. She walked toward the house without a word, leaving yolk and shell behind. By the time she reached the porch, Samuel was already lowering his rifle. "They're not here to kill," he said. She looked at him. "You sure?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The governor was among them. She recognized him even from afar. Broad-shouldered, gray-bearded, dressed not in uniform, but in the kind of dark coat meant to conceal intention. His horse was the only one still, even in motion, a beast trained for show and silence. "They came all the way here," Mary whispered. "Just to drag you back?" Samuel shook his head. "They came to remind the world who still holds the reins." The riders stopped at the gate. None of them dismounted. The governor raised a gloved hand, a silent command. Samuel stepped off the porch. Slowly, carefully. Mary followed, but he held his hand up to stop her. "I'll go alone." She didn't listen. Together, they walked toward the fence, dust swirling at their feet. The governor finally spoke, his voice dry as ash. You look smaller than I remember. Samuel didn't flinch. You look older. I should have buried you with the rest. You tried. A silence fell between them, the kind that made men's fingers itch near their holsters. I spared you a trial, the governor said, out of pity. Now I wonder if that was a mistake. Samuel took a breath. I'm not hiding. Not anymore. Then come back, the governor said, leaning forward. Face what you ran from. Samuel looked past him to the men with blank stares and loaded rifles. Face what? A hanging? Or just another headline? You were the best man I had, the governor said, quieter now. You killed clean. You obeyed. And then you broke. I woke up. Mary stepped forward. He's done enough. The governor's eyes met hers. And who are you? I'm the one who fed him when the world turned its back. The governor studied her. Then Samuel. Finally, he spoke. If you stay here, you'll be forgotten, buried under prairie dirt and gossip. No name, no pardon, just silence. Samuel looked at Mary, then back to the man who once commanded him. Then let that be my justice. The governor didn't reply, just gave a signal. The riders turned slowly, like ghosts melting back into the dusk. No shots, no chains. Just 12 silent men disappearing over the ridge, like they had never come at all. Mary let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Samuel turned to her. Still sure about standing with me? She nodded. Now, more than ever. And as the night wrapped around them, they stood at the gate, no longer running, no longer hiding, just two souls who decided to live, no matter who came riding. The riders were gone, but the dust hadn't settled. For days, the town buzzed like a wasp's nest kicked too hard. Men muttered in barbershops. Women whispered behind flour sacks. Children were told not to look toward Mary's place, though. Their eyes couldn't help it. 12 riders, the governor himself, and no blood spilled? It didn't make sense. And folks in towns like this didn't like what they couldn't explain. Mary kept her head high at the general store, though the clerk gave her half-measured scoops, and a look like her presence soured the flour. Samuel stayed close to the property, not hiding, just watching, fixing, listening. 3 days later, they returned, but only one rider this time, the governor. He came without soldiers, without noise, dressed plain, just a tired man on a tired horse. Samuel met him at the porch. Mary stood behind the screen door, one hand resting on the frame, the other near her kitchen knife. Not for defense, but for principle. The governor stepped down slowly. His boots touched the earth like he wasn't sure it would hold him. I came alone, he said. Samuel nodded. I noticed. They sat on the porch. Two men who'd once ridden through fire together, now, sitting across from each other like ghosts from different wars. You could have been a general, the governor said. You had the loyalty of killers and the silence of a priest. I lost too many men, Samuel replied, and too much of myself. The governor's face was carved in years of sun and sin. And now you dig gardens? I dig what I can live with. A long silence stretched between them. Then, the key. Governor reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Heavy seal, red wax. A pardon, he said, placing it on the table. Signed, sealed, with my name. Samuel didn't touch it. I won't offer it again, the governor said. Samuel looked at him. You're not here because you forgive me. You're here because men are starting to talk. Because if I stay standing, others might too. The governor didn't deny it. I came to give you one last chance to vanish, he said. With your name cleared, your past sealed shut. And the truth? No one wants the truth. Samuel, they want quiet. Mary stepped outside then, quiet but deliberate. Truth's already here, she said, growing under our porch, in the dirt, in the silence he earned. The governor looked at her. He's not the man you think he is. No, she said. He's better. He stood slowly. This place will bury him, and you with it. Mary's voice didn't waver. We're not afraid of being buried. We're afraid of forgetting who we are. The governor stared at Samuel one last time, then at the paper between them. You can burn it, frame it. It's yours now. and then he was gone. They watched his horse disappear down the road, a solitary figure swallowed by golden dust. Samuel picked up the paper, turned it over once, then again. Without a word, he walked to the stove and dropped it into the fire. Mary didn't ask why. She simply turned back to the table, poured 2 mugs of black coffee, and waited for him to sit. When he did, the silence between them was no longer a wait, but a shelter. The following morning the wind was different. It carried no dust, no scent of smoke, only stillness, as if the earth itself had paused to see what Samuel would do now that the weight had been lifted, or at least burned. He stood alone beneath the oak tree, the same one where flowers had once failed to grow. A new row of green shoots now pierced the dry soil, stretching toward the sun with stubborn hope. He didn't smile, but he knelt beside them and brushed the dirt gently from a stem. Mary watched from the porch, arms crossed, heart full of questions she wouldn't ask. When he rose, he didn't look at her. He looked toward the hills, where the governor had disappeared just hours before. A trail still faintly marked the land, and with a saddlebag packed and rifle cleaned, Samuel could have followed it. He walked slowly toward the house. "You leavin'?" Mary asked, her voice even. He paused at the bottom of the steps. "That's what I always do." She didn't look away. "And what happens after that?" "I find another porch, another place to hide." Mary stepped down to meet him. The morning light hit her face, and for a moment she looked far younger than she claimed. Or maybe just lighter, like the shadows had let go. "I don't need you to hide here," she said. "I need someone who knows how to stay." Samuel glanced toward the hills once more, then back to her. "You'd let me stay?" She raised her brow. "If I say yes, are you gonna start talking too much?" He chuckled softly, the first real sound of life from him since he'd arrived. "No," he said. "I reckon I'd build a new fence. Maybe fix that cracked well cover." "You sure you know how?" "I've mended worse." She stepped aside, and he climbed the porch steps like a man stepping into something sacred. They sat together in silence, just as they had the first night, but this time the quiet held something warm between them. That afternoon, they walked the edge of the property. Samuel pointed out where a shed could go. Mary mentioned the old apple tree she always wanted to plant. He nodded, already calculating what wood they'd need. Under the oak tree, she showed him the shallow grave of her dog, gone 3 winters now. He removed his hat, knelt, and said nothing, but she saw the reverence in his posture. Later, they shared cornbread and coffee at the small table inside the house. The walls still bore the same cracks, the curtains still frayed, but somehow the place didn't feel so worn anymore. "I won't ask you to promise anything," Mary said. "I don't have much left to promise," he replied. She reached across the table, fingers brushing his. "Just stay until the frost comes." He looked at their hands. "And after, we'll see if you're still useful." He laughed, a quiet, low rumble that seemed to rise from somewhere untouched for years. As night fell, the stars returned, brighter this time. The porch creaked under their weight, but held. Samuel leaned back in his chair, hat low, boots crossed, content in a way he hadn't felt since boyhood. Mary rocked beside him, lips curled in a soft, knowing smile. And just before the lantern was blown out, she whispered, "I think the flowers might bloom this time." Samuel didn't answer, but he stayed. The seasons didn't change all at once. The grass remained brittle for a while longer, and the nights held onto their chill even, as spring whispered through the trees. But something on Mary's land had shifted, not just in the garden, where green began to climb through the soil, but in the air itself, in the rhythm of the days. Samuel stayed. He rose early, chopped wood before the sun had a chance to rise high, repaired hinges, cleaned gutters, sanded the kitchen table until the splinters stopped catching on her apron. He never announced his work. He just did it, steady and quiet, like a man trying to rebuild something he couldn't name. Mary didn't press for more. She cooked. She read from the worn Bible her husband had once carried to war. She hummed while stirring pots, not for him, not for show, but because her hands had learned to feel lighter. One morning, a boy from The town wandered too close. No older than 10, all dust and freckles, with a slingshot in his pocket and suspicion in his eyes. He stopped at the gate, staring at Samuel, who was splitting wood with measured ease. "You, the man that made the governor leave?" Samuel didn't pause. "Depends who's asking. My pa says you used to be real dangerous." Samuel rested the axe. "Maybe I was." The boy squinted. "You don't look dangerous now." "Good." The boy looked at the house. "Is that your wife?" Samuel glanced toward the porch, where Mary was sipping tea and pretending not to listen. "Not yet," he said softly, "but I stay like she is." The boy nodded, satisfied with that, then ran off down the trail, kicking up dust like a messenger of peace. That evening, Mary joined him by the oak tree. The shoots had become stems. The stems, buds, a promise of color to come. "You were kind to that boy," she said. "He was kind to me." They stood in silence, watching the last gold of the sun stretch across the horizon. Later they sat on the porch, 2 chairs, 2 mugs, a thin blanket folded over the rail for colder nights. "Do you miss it?" Mary asked. "The road?" "No. The noise, the fire, the war." He thought a moment, then shook his head. "I miss the men I lost, but not the ones I followed." She leaned back, her gaze on the stars. "And what about the man you used to be?" "I buried him," he said. "Right here." They watched the stars rise higher. A pair of owls called in the distance. The mule brayed once and then fell, silent again. And then, for the first time since he'd stepped bleeding onto her porch, Samuel reached for her hand. He didn't squeeze it, didn't pull, just held it. Mary turned to him, eyes soft, tired, and shining in the lantern glow. "You're not a ghost anymore," she said. "No," he replied, "you saw me. That made me real again." In the morning they planted the apple tree, and in time the town stopped whispering. The porch remained, weathered, creaking, full of quiet footsteps and shared meals, but no longer a place of waiting or hiding. It became a place of staying.
Before you go, some people leave pain behind by running. Others learn to stay and build something new out of what remains. If this story moved you, even in silence, tell us what part stayed with you the most. We read every comment, and sometimes your words are exactly what someone else needed to hear. And if you believe stories like this still matter, hit subscribe. That way, we'll know you're still out there, listening, just like we are.